whatever happened in here? All right, looks like we are live again, so we can do this all over again. Let me just check that we are actually streaming. This is part of the behind the mix, which is actually a part of the show that we do before, and we go from the top. Okay.
You're flashing.
Yeah, I see it blinking.
All right, it's part of the connection. Let me check. Can you hear me all right, or do you hear my voice like cutting?
Good. No, I hear you all right.
Excellent. Okay, so the video signal is working. The good thing is that I can edit this a little bit later. So, all right, so we go with the intro once again. It's take two. I love technology. All right, okay, intro in 3, 2, 1. Yes, you are listening to this if you are getting to YouTube and Facebook. Bienvenidos, buenas noches tengan todos ustedes. Perhaps if you are watching this right now, you are listening in English, in Spanish, don't worry. We will be having the rest of the show in English because we have a very special and very talented guest with us. We have already the honor to be talking with him before in Churros y Palomitas, but right now we have him in the show that everybody loves because we talk about comics, and he is Mark Russell. How are you doing, Mark?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
It's a real pleasure for us to having you with us in here. Thanks once again for accepting the invitation. And well, you guys know the rest of the crew. First of all, we have Gilberto, alias Nightboy.
Hi, how are you? Welcome, everybody.
All right, and we have also Good Rick, also known as Psicotropico.
Hey, a pleasure to be here with Mark.
And last but not least, we have Daniel Villamil, also known as El Wookie.
Hi, good night.
All right, so we are going to talk about some of the projects that have been released, and we have also been recommending some of your titles, of your previous titles, Mark. I believe that even from the Flintstones, and we have talked about that a little bit before, and then we have the really nice surprise of some of the upcoming titles that we are going to be released, or even one that was released last week, one of those fascinating crossovers with Hanna-Barbera and the DC comic characters. So why don't we start talking about where did the idea to mix Green Lantern, Jon Stewart with Huckleberry Hound came from?
Well, that came from the editor, Jim Chadwick, who works at DC. He approached me about writing a crossover, and to me it was a golden opportunity because it gave me a chance to sort of put an epilogue onto the Huckleberry Hound character I had introduced in the Snagglepuss series. So I was on board. And when he said he wanted it set in 1971 with the new John Stewart Green Lantern who took over for Hal Jordan and, against the backdrop of the Vietnam War and Watergate, I thought it was, again, just a chance to tell a real sort of timely tale with allegories to our current situation.
It's interesting because, you are mixing familiar characters in this case, but also, as you mentioned, it's part of a continuation of your previous work in there. And did you find any trouble by trying to locate it in a specific time period? Because, you know that in comic books we have reboots every 5 years or every 10 years. So if you an story originally appeared in the 70s, right now it should be like from the 90s or something like that. Or it was no problem at all?
It actually felt pretty natural to me because I felt like there was a lot of parallels between what's going on in the United States now, what's going on in 1971, where you had, or rather 72, where you had a president who everyone sort of knew was guilty of all kinds of corruption, but nobody could really prove it yet, and about how that process goes, of like about how abuse of power tends to undermine itself. And so I thought there was a lot of parallel between that and now, and also about how people have to keep pretending that the Vietnam War is winnable, and and that everything is going great when in fact everybody sort of understands intuitively that the war is lost. And I feel like there's that sense of public self-deception that makes that period of history very analogous to our own.
All right. So, do we have any questions from Gilberto? Are you there?
Yeah, it came to my attention that you managed to keep Jon Stewart not using his power ring, not using all his baggage, because I want to think that at that point of the history, he wasn't came along with all the stuff in Cosmic Odyssey, the destruction of Shanti, and all. But it really jumped that it seemed to me that more than an heroic comic book or an heroic history, you kept it very social, dealing with all the doubts within the Huckleberry Hound and Jon Stewart. How easy or how difficult or how the decision came to when it came to not using the power ring, because it would, some people it would seem so easy just to use the gimmick of the ring and try to solve the problems and try to use Huckleberry Hound very little just to question the intentions of the motives of Jon Stewart.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of comic books about superheroes just sort of using their powers based on the assumption that they should be using their power or that they inherently know the right way to use their power. There's not a lot of comics about people considering implications of their power. That's what.
Sorry, Mark.
Use it. Well,
okay.
Good.
Sorry, Mark. We lost you for a little bit. Could you repeat the last phrases? Sorry.
Oh yeah. So I wanted to be a meditation on power, about the way it is abused, and also when you should use your power, and about how we all have, even if we don't have a power ring, we all have a certain amount of power. About how that is ultimately the power that really it resonates and stays, the power that we get with other people.
All right, in there. Gilberto, do you have a follow-up question in there?
Yeah, it's. Do you find easy to relate all the social activity around the 70s with all the Vietnam war and all that stuff, with all the things that are happening right now in the United States? Because the similitudes between Nixon and your current president are quite hard to miss these days.
Yeah. No, it's fairly intentional. Yeah, I feel like there's this period of history, or there's a period of time in these eras where everybody sort of knows more than they are letting on. Like everyone is still pretending like life is normal, but secretly everybody knows that we're in a very new and dark chapter of our history. And I think part of it is, that we don't know how to express it yet. And I think that this is ultimately what this comic is about using what limited power we have as people to bring down the charade of power, and about how power really is just where you believe it is. And once people start believing that the people over them have the power, it evaporates, and it's a carefully crafted mirage by the people who hold it. But as long as it's based on intimidation and fear, it's always illusory. It's always minutes away from being shattered because when people stop being fooled by you, they tend to stop being afraid of you.
It's kind of interesting because, well, obviously the Green Lantern is one of the figures that it's associated with different forces, and one that you mentioned is actually the fear. So, something that also struck me the most is one of the pages that I was showing from the issue of the crossover with the Huckleberry Hound and Green Lantern, where, well, you have, as you mentioned before, sort of a following with Huckleberry Hound, where he's no longer a character for a kids show, but he's actually a stand-up comedian. and then you can see how some of these jokes, because they are criticizing politics, they are not well received in some sort of publics. Obviously, if you are going to go with the military, well, you have certain parameters in there. If you are going to go with a more conservative state, with a more liberal state, obviously you have different kind of feelings in these situations. So for the personality of Huckleberry Hound, did you base it in this case in somebody else that you know, perhaps in characteristics of a stand-up comedian, or it came out from your interpretation of the original character?
Not on a specific person that I know, but I think that there's some parallels between what's going on in that, what's going on in comics right now, in that people who choose to be political tend to be targeted by alt-right fans, or fans that claim to be against any sort of like partisanship or politics in comics, but are really just don't want your politics in comics. And so I feel like there's some of that at work, where comic book creators and artists in general during these times of peril feel intimidated to really speak their minds, because they're afraid of the backlash. And in Huckleberry Hound's case, the backlash was very real. He basically has his career ruined because he speaks out against the war during a USO military tour. And I also wanted to sort of have the interpersonal dynamic where John Stewart is just at the beginning of his career. He's a brand new Green Lantern. He's still in training. And Huckleberry Hound is at the end of his career. He has kind of, because he chose to speak out against injustices, he's destroyed his career. And so he, in a way, sort of poses a cautionary tale for John Stewart and raises the stakes for John Stewart's own decisions that he has to make in regards to how much he's going to use his power to stop the injustices he sees around him.
All right. Zico, do you have any questions for Mark?
Oh yeah, I like to say that this story for me is very well crafted, because it joins John Stewart that appears in 1971, 72, kinda, and the Nixon stuff, the Vietnam stuff, and all joined together to be a really good critic of the moment that it was living the country. You know? Even checkers embodies well done with Huckle. No? They're both are dogs, all very well crafted. For me, the question, Mark, is I always read you and notice that you always like to send a message, to send to tell a social message that tell us more than the story itself. Notice that it's how important is to tell that the social stuff and even entertain with the comic book.
Well, I don't know. I don't really feel like I sit down and set out to tell sort of social stories, but I do think as writers, we tend to write about the things in the world around us that really bother us. They tend to be the things that sort of we obsess with when we're not writing. And those tend to be the things that leak out into our fiction when we are writing, because we're spending so much time thinking about them. So I think that naturally I hew towards writing about things in the world that really are just troubling me, and it's hard to write, I think, these days without writing about the current situation in America. And I also think that all good science fiction is really sort of a metaphor. It is a satire of the present, even if it's set in the future or if it's set with, you're populated by superheroes. I think it's always kind of about the subconscious of the author and the zeitgeist of the place in which the author lives.
All right. Do you have a follow-up question, Zico?
No, it's very clear.
All right.
I think that is very, very assertive, and the satire, as he says, is the mainstream.
All right.
Yeah, I think really you just want to talk about the world in your life in as direct and meaningful way as you can. And luckily for me, that usually makes it funnier. And you can talk about something really directly and as bluntly as possible. It tends to lend itself really well to humor and satire, and I think social parable.
All right. So, Wookie, we're going with you to see. Do you have any follow-up question about this or a different project, actually, from Mark?
No, it's from this. People like Jerry Seinfeld says that doing stand up is difficult these times because now everything hurts a lot of people. You want to reflect that with Huckleberry doing stand up?
Um, yeah, I think that you ultimately have to say what you believe and let the chips fall where they may. So I think the worst thing you could do as a writer, or as an artist, or as a comedian is worry about the people you're hurting in a way. You have to say what you think and just sort of like let it all out. And if people are hurt by the truth, then maybe the truth ought to hurt them.
I think that we just found our fifth member.
Yeah.
If may I, we have seen through all your recent work, the Flintstones, the Snugglepuss, and Green Lantern, Huckleberry Hound, that you have become quite a social voice or social writer. How has been the all the reaction from all the people around you, or fans, or the social justice warriors in the internet? There has been a positive reaction to your work, or because Flintstone was a very well done, very well rounded social critic. So was the Snagglepuss from the minorities, so to speak. And this time with Huckleberry Hound, sorry. As you said, Jonas Ward was at the beginning of his career as a Green Lantern, and Huckleberry Hound was at the end of it. Was actually almost seen as a reject from all the comedians that surround him, his peers. Um, how has been the reactions to all these themes from your fans or from the people that may not be your fans, but they are buying all the have written?
Well, the reaction's been very good. I think largely because this is all I'm known for. So people who are my fans got in knowing what it is I do. But I don't have a lot of people who were fans of me that are disappointed that all of a sudden I'm being political, or that I'm writing about social things, because that's the way I've been since the beginning. Obviously, I get some blowback from people who don't agree with me politically, but that's to be expected. Again, I don't think they should have to take my feelings into consideration any more than I take theirs into consideration. We should just say what we think and let the ideas win or lose based on their own merit. So I'm very pleased with the reaction. I think the worst thing you can get as a writer is indifference, where people just sort of like think, well, that was a nice story, and then instantly forget about it. So I think if you say something that resonates with people, whether it's something they really love or something that really bothered them, and that they, either way, you're doing your job. You're moving people.
Sorry about the small pause. I want to talk about some of the other titles that you have been writing. Perhaps a lot of us got to know you by the titles that you were publishing in DC Comics. If I remember correctly, it began with the press, and then from there you went to the other titles. However, that's not the only studio where you have been working, because you also have been working with a character that I find fascinating, because I believe that it's kind of hard to translate to modern times, and I am talking about the Lone Ranger. So, how did you go to write about this character? It's something that came to you, or is a character that you were looking to write?
A little bit of both. Dynamite approached me about writing a title for them, and they gave me a list of the titles that they had the rights to. And when I saw that Lone Ranger was on the list, I immediately went for that. One, because I've always just wanted to write a Western. And two, because I felt like he's so iconic in a way that, like, the Flintstones are iconic, or Snagglepuss is iconic, that he inspires me to write a story based upon him and the world that he's in. And to me, the West has always been kind of the mythology of America. It is to us what, say, like the stories of Hercules and Zeus are to ancient Greece. Something that is based on a little bit of fact, but more about the legend we create to tell ourselves what we want to hear about ourselves. So I thought it'd be interesting to do a Western that was more realistic, that showed us a more realistic portrait of ourselves and what it is we have been doing uh, since the 19th century. And really, it's about him and Tonto trying to prevent, as you see there in the page you just shown, the resurrection of the cotton plantation as the model for American civilization, which I think is what the entire conservative movement in the last 100 years has been about. It's been about trying to model American society on the cotton plantation.
Hmm. And one question also about this title, it's kind of interesting because in the family of the characters of the Lone Ranger and also the Green Hornet, I remember that it was like the first connection between characters from the present and the, in this case of the Western times of the Old West. But do you have any problems reflecting the voices of some characters, like the, in this case, the owners of the plantations, or perhaps Tonto?
Yeah, I think it's always something that you have to sort of worry about as a writer because you don't want to just every character just sound like you. You want to make them all sort of iconic and for them to make sense. And I think also you don't want them all necessarily to reflect your opinions. I think it's what makes a story interesting is a conflict between worldviews, a conflict between perspectives. And the way to do that effectively is to sort of like give voice to perspectives you don't necessarily agree with, but to make them not like sympathetic.
Hmm. Because it's really easy to write a villain that it's just like we say in Spanish, el malo de Malolandia, or the baddest of the baddest in English. But you have to feel, if not empathy, you have to feel him as a real character, I believe.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
agree. I that the best villains always have a perspective. It may be pure evil, but you understand why they believe what they believe. It isn't just to the galaxy.
And with the Lone Ranger, how big of a person, iconic character, and paradoxically, a character that nobody talks a lot about. There's no plan for upcoming movies or television series. That it's not in a super territory that's been working since the last the decade began. Uh, how big of a pressure is for you to write it?
I actually find it kind of liberating to write a character like that because there's not many expectations. Like the Flintstones, which had two sort of disastrous live action movies made on it, and were pretty much dead as a franchise, except for maybe the vitamin pills. When I took it over, it allowed me a lot of freedom to recreate it in a way that makes sense to me. I think the same is kind of true with Lone Ranger. There were no plans to do a movie or a TV show. It was sort of not a very popular franchise, but that allowed me to take it in a direction that was meaningful to me because I didn't have to fit into a bunch of continuity or worry about a bunch of executives getting upset if I did something with it they didn't like.
All right. So, Zico, do you have any questions about the Lone Ranger before we go to a different title?
Okay, Lone Ranger. I read the first volume from Brett Matthews and John Cassidy for Dynamite Comics too. It was more like heroic, if you can do it. It was a long origin story between the bad hombres there. But now I read your first number of issue, your first issue, and I found that the Western was alive. There was real problems. There was landlords. There were fences put against the natives. against other poor people or less with less resources. This is going to be the thematic awarding in this volume of Lone Ranger.
Yes, it really is about civilization as the theft of land, and about forcing people off of the land they've always lived on, and about that being sort of the cardinal sin of civilization, and about the Lone Ranger and Tonto having to stop the inexorable march of civilization, and about how we value the more we have, the more we tend to value our possessions more than we do people, which paradoxically causes us to value them more than we do our own lives. Which is sort of the undoing, of these villains. The fact that they're so predictable because they're so invested in their property that it makes them less dangerous in a way, because you always know what they're going to do, and they're going to put themselves at risk to protect their property.
Okay.
And
I really like the first issue.
and Wookie, do you have one question about the Lone Ranger before we go to the Fantastic Twins?
Oh, what?
No, but before the Fantastic Twins, I want to ask about the bump. Marquis the Cocoa. How did you came with the title?
Love it.
Yeah, it's very fun but creepy. It's great. How do you start with that?
I'm sorry, were you asking about the Count Chocula story I wrote?
Yes.
Yeah.
About that
Yeah.
one.
Edgar Allan Poe's.
Yeah.
I'm trying to write like a Count Chocula fan fiction story forever. I originally posted one on my Facebook, and I've been waiting for a chance to put it in comic books. So when they let me do it for Ahoy's Snifter of Terror, the Edgar Allan Poe comic, I was ecstatic.
Of course, it has to be this kind of reference that you have in this kind of story.
I have a hard time passing at the pun. So yeah, I'm glad you caught that. I didn't know how many people were going to catch that. The little note was called Coco Chanel.
There we have it. So remember, this is actually one of the titles that we recommended in the sections of the recommendations from D-Strip-Ando. So now you have it from the voice of the writer, of the author of this story. So let's go to actually something that it's coming. We have some titles that one is from Vertigo, but the one that actually started making more noise in conventions, it's the one about the Wonder Twins. So these characters are kind of hard or tough to work, because they actually came from a cartoon, a kid's cartoon, as pretty much every cartoon is. However, they haven't been like really successful with the mature readers. And yes, I am using quotes in case that you are only listening to the audio of this. So what's the appeal that you find in this kind of characters, or what's like the perspective that you can tell us that you are going to bring to these old-fashioned kid characters?
Well, I was really excited to be offered the Wonder Twins, and to specifically to write it. And I said yes before I even finished asking, because one, I grew up on Super Friends, so I loved the Super Friends when I was a kid, and the Wonder Twins. And two, I think that it's exciting to write characters with very limited, very specific superhero powers, because that helps. That's why, as a writer, it's good to have these limitations, because it limits the ways you can go with it. And also, I'm always attracted to being able to write about a time and place from the perspective of an outsider. Like the only one who really understood America was the Tocqueville, or else. I think in a similar way, like the Wonder Twins come here from the planet Exor, they'll have really sort of good observations about the Earth that we can't, that most people won't have, because we're all sort of immersed in it. So it gave me a chance to sort of like use them sort of in the way that I used the Great Gazoo and the Flintstones comic, which is an outsider coming in and realizing just how messed up everything is.
I see. So any questions about this title, guys? Gilberto?
Yeah, it's not the first time that the DC has been trying to introduce to the main continuity, so to speak, the Wonder Twins. First, we saw a very bad done, creepy kind of what the hell in Extreme Justice, the beginning of the 90s. Then the last time we saw them was in Young Justice, that was the beginning of the 2000s. And the reactions has been a love of hate relationship because people are quite fond of the cartoons where they came from, and they hate all the comic book appearances. Uh, are the stories you're going to try to not write that you're going to write in its title are going to be sort of their own, as you said, trying to understand America, trying to understand the world, the superhero world that they are. Uh, I don't know how to say it. How to get involved with it, or are you trying to get another kind of stories, nothing to get related with what Snyder is doing on the Justice League or Abnett is doing on Titans? That they are like an amalgam of the same story.
Well, the Wonderline will be in DC continuity, so that is one thing I have to be cognizant of. DC continuity, and I can't violate storylines that are happening in the other comics. But I'm not really writing this in conjunction with the other Wonder titles. And I think one of the mistakes that previous iterations of the Wonder Twins in comics have made is that they try to take these kids who are on their face kind of a little ridiculous and make them sort of these badass superheroes. Whereas what I want to kind of do is the opposite. I want to take this badass superhero world and put it in the world of these sort of kind of ridiculous kids. I want to do it the opposite way and have the world be sort of like more goofy, like you would expect from the Super Friends cartoon, than from what you'd expect from the other sort of DC lines. So I want it to not be seamless with the other lines and not violate them, but at the same time, I want it to be something completely different.
Okay, so it's gonna be in the same world, but in the same continuity, but in like I say, in a different room.
Yeah, exactly. A completely different perspective.
Okay, thank you.
All right. More questions about the Wonder Twins. Siko, Wookie.
Yeah, I have.
Let's go with
Go
Wookie.
ahead.
Okay, Glick is still the comical relief, like in the cartoons, or be different?
Yeah, big difference. Meek does appear. He turns out like that Zan is reading a comic book, and he sees an ad for circus monkeys. You can buy old discarded circus monkeys for $10 or whatever. So he sends away and gets like the circus monkey that turns out to be Gleek, and Gleek saves them by doing tricks and stuff that he learned in the circus. And they're treating it like, oh, Gleek, you saved the day, but meanwhile Gleek is replaying these horrible memories in his head about them training him in the circus and abusing him to like get him to learn how to do these tricks. So it's a lot about how the sort of sad exploitation that lies underneath the training of superheroes, and that's more than I should, but yeah, it's a very sort of dark, bittersweet comic relief.
Thanks. That sounds very interesting, creepy, but cool.
Creepy.
All at the same time.
Like, interesting. It's funny how often those two intersect.
Excellent.
All right. One question from you, Siko, before we go to the questions from the audience.
I was going to. Well, I want to ask you, how do you deal with the cheesy powers of the twins? But with the explication of Glick, I know that I will get something special from you.
Yeah, the thing that I always kind of like was fascinated by the Wonder Twins is that they work in the Hall of Justice, where you've got Superman, the most powerful being in the world, and then you've got Batman, the world's greatest detective, and then you basically have a guy who can turn into steam. So huge impact between the other superheroes, and like Jaina's hardly much better. She just but it forces you. How could you possibly combine these powers in a way that works together? So in a lot of ways, I think it opens up a lot more opportunities for sort of funny and interesting resolutions than if you just have a guy who can, melt steel with his eyes and fly through the wall and arrest everybody.
That maybe San could be Aquaman's best friend.
Yeah, there is. I'm not. This isn't too much of a spoiler because I have.
Sorry.
But Zan ends up making the hockey team of the school largely because of his ability to turn into a fresh coat of ice on the skating rink.
All right, so that's actually a clever way of not reinventing, but using the characters. And we have some questions from the audience, thanks to Rodrigo Diaz and to Carolina. They are actually both of our patrons in this project that we have. And we have some interesting questions. First of all, Caro says that, let me read it in here. Why has decided DC to bring back these old characters? Because she thinks that they were, well, mostly forgotten, and it's something that we're actually talking about.
Well, I think that was mostly Brian Michael Bendis' decision because he wanted to do a Wonder line that would speak to sort of teenage readers, younger readers, and get them into comics and superheroes that were more relatable to them. And the Wonder Twins were just one of the titles he thought would be really resonant with younger readers, which I wholeheartedly agree with. I think that it's anything you can do to get younger readers reading comic books and sort of meaningful stories, I think is a good thing. Get them thinking about the world around them.
All right, and we have another question that it's actually a little bit in line with the characters at least, from Rodrigo Diaz, and he asks, he is wondering if you have any plan to bring, at least in the background, characters like Apache Chief or Black Vulcan, some of the old Super Friends.
Yeah, I wrote a lot of them in there, and the ones that were Hanna-Barbera that weren't also DC, they made me take out. Yeah, I had like Black Vulcan in one. They made me replace him with Black Lightning because he was Hanna-Barbera and not DC. And yeah, I had Samurai in one, and I had to take him out and put in somebody else. But yeah, I wanted specifically to use like as many of the minor Super Friends characters who would just show up and tell you to brush your teeth, or would just give like health tips. Yeah, I wanted to use as many of those as possible, but unfortunately, I can only use the ones that exist both in the DC and Barbera worlds.
Just one question. Do you have any plan to make a crossover? Or do you see these characters crossing with the new Young Justice title that's about to come?
I have no plans to cross over with Young Justice, but I'm excited for Young Justice. And maybe if once we get past the initial 6-issue story arc, I would be open to doing some sort of crossover with Young Justice. I think that would be great.
Yeah.
They are from the same line, no?
Yeah, right. Yeah, same line. Yeah, I've got the first 6 issues pretty tightly mapped out, but after that, anything goes. I wouldn't surprise me if we crossed over with one or more of the other Wonder titles.
That would be pretty cool.
All right, and we will be really looking forward to read it. And as Carolina mentioned, perhaps there were some characters that were sort of forgotten, but actually we thought the same about some of the other characters that you have brought to life with a new. I am still waiting for some of the characters to be named as León Melquiades. I don't know if you remember that was the name of Snagglepuss in Spanish. So I am still waiting for some character name like that.
You haven't told him the Morocco Topo and Inspector Ardilla, no?
That's correct. Perhaps we can make some trivia time later about that. So we're pretty much about to finish this transmission. So in case that people want to check any more information about your titles, they can, well, obviously go to the closest comic book shop to buy some of these. Rodrigo Diaz actually mentioned that he just bought the 2 trade paperbacks of the Flintstones, so there you have it. That's the best way to read it. But they also can find you in social networks like Twitter. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, anyone who wants to follow me on Twitter, they can do so at Manrus. As for any updates on any comics I'm writing or things I'm doing, I pretty much put it all on Twitter.
All right, so I was just waiting for this to load. And sorry, I have to comment about it, but I just love the description that actually you added in your on your bio. I know that you have changed it from time to time, but it's like Eisner losing comic book writer. So you actually took it with a great sense of humor behind the Flintstones, Snagglepuss, the Lone Ranger, and Comic Soup, the Wonder Twins. So there you have it. In twitter.com/manross, they can find you and perhaps send some comments and good vibes to you, Mark.
I look forward to it.
All right. And thank you very much to all of you who have been watching this transmission. Thank you to Rodrigo. Thanks to Caro. And to everybody who is going to watch this afterwards. Remember that we will also have the audio downloadable version probably tomorrow morning. And especially thanks to you, Mark. It was a real pleasure to have the chance to talk again with you.
For me as well. Thank you.
All right, and remember, guys, that if you want to support this and other projects, we have actually a Patreon page, which is located in patreon.com/D-Strip-Ando, and you can follow us in social networks such as Facebook and Twitter. Just look for D-Strip-Ando, letter D, strip, A-N-D-O. And that's all for us. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us. And once again, thanks, Mark. And thanks, everybody. Bye. All right, I am